I never planned to walk away from everything. Not that night, not ever. But sometimes a single sentence can end the version of yourself you've spent a lifetime maintaining. Mine was, I need the money tomorrow. It wasn't just a request, it was an order. My father's voice, sharp and metallic, even over the phone, sliced through the quiet of my apartment. I'd been finishing up a late-night financial report spreadsheets glowing pale blue on my monitor when the call came through. I should have known better than to pick up. Deborah, he said, skipping any greeting. Your brother's in trouble again, a serious one this time. The way he said again carried both exhaustion and accusation, like Aaron's mistakes were somehow my fault for not preventing them. I leaned back in my chair, letting silence stretch a few seconds longer than he liked. How much? He didn't hesitate. 350,000. The number didn't shock me. Not anymore. It was the tone, the certainty that I would comply, that hollowed something inside me. Dad, I said quietly, that's not pocket change. It's family, he replied. Like that explained everything. Aaron borrowed from private investors, not banks, the kind of people who don't send polite reminders. I pictured my brother's face, Aaron, 29, a dreamer who never met a risk he didn't like. He'd always been the star in our parents' sky, the charming one, the one who could smile through disaster and somehow make it look like destiny. What did he do this time, I asked. A heavy sigh came through the speaker, followed by the clink of glass. Scotch. He tried to open another boutique, said he had investors lined up. Turns out they're loan sharks. They're threatening him. I closed my eyes. And you want me to pay off criminals? I want you to protect your brother, he snapped. He's family. I need the money tomorrow. No delays. I stood up, pacing across the living room, past the framed photos of places I'd planned to see, maps, tickets I'd never used, journals filled with languages I'd studied for trips I never took. The room suddenly felt smaller, airless. Tomorrow, I repeated. You realize liquidating that much isn't instant. You work in finance, he said, irritation flaring. You know people. Pull some strings. That's what you're good at, solving problems. No, please, no thank you. Not even acknowledgement that the sum he was demanding represented my future. Just expectation, as always. A small, tired smile crept onto my face. I'd been the family's fixer since I was 16, first with Aaron's, then tuition, then down payments, then bailouts for Aaron's impulsive ventures. My father had built his real estate business through intimidation and precision, and he ruled our family the same way, authority first, affection later if there was time. My mother used to say, he just wants the best for us, Deborah. He doesn't know how to say it gently. But decades of not gentle left bruises you couldn't see. You know, I said finally, there's something strange about how you always call when he screws up, but never when things are fine. This isn't the time for your lectures, he snapped. I'm counting on you. You'll have it ready in the morning. He ended the call before I could answer. The silence afterward was deafening. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the soft tap of rain against the window, all of it suddenly louder, sharper. I sat back down, staring at the spreadsheet still glowing on my laptop. Rows of numbers, precise and logical. Numbers made sense. People didn't. The clock on my wall read 11:46 p.m. In less than 9 hours, my father expected 350,000. My phone buzzed again. Mira. Her message popped up. Still working late. I hesitated before typing back. Family crisis. Aaron again. A minute later, the screen lit with an incoming call. I answered. You sound like you're grinding your teeth, she said softly. I laughed without humor. That obvious. What happened? Same story. Bigger number. This time he owes 350,000. She was silent for a moment. And your father wants you to fix it. As always. Will you? I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. My whole life I'd stepped in not because I wanted to, but because not doing so always seemed worse. The guilt, the yelling, the disappointment, it was easier to pay the price than to endure the aftermath. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe something in me had quietly cracked. Deborah. I don't know, I said finally. I'm tired, Mira. I've been tired for years. There was compassion in her voice when she said, then maybe it's time you let them handle the fallout. I wanted to believe her, but my father's words kept echoing. I need the money tomorrow. I hung up a few minutes later and just stood there in the quiet apartment. My reflection stared back from the window, the tired man in his early 30s who'd built a career, a house, a carefully controlled life. A man who'd done everything right and still felt like a supporting character in his own story. On the counter sat my passport tucked inside a leather case. I'd bought it 5 years ago when I first started saving for a sabbatical, a year of travel, a promise to myself I'd never kept. It was supposed to be my reward, my freedom fund. I opened it now, tracing the unmarked pages with my thumb. Blank like a life unlived. I thought of Aaron, his constant charm, the chaos that followed him like perfume. I thought of my mother forever smoothing things over, and my father with his booming commands that disguised fear of losing control. Maybe they didn't realize how much of me they'd already taken. Maybe I didn't either until this moment. The rain grew heavier outside. A thunderclap rattled the window. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into soft darkness lit only by the city's faint orange glow. I whispered to no one tomorrow. Then I smiled a small, dangerous smile because for the first time, that word didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. The night stretched long after that call. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the condensation sliding down a half-empty glass of water, replaying the same question in my head. When did I become the solution to every problem I didn't cause? It wasn't always this way. There was a time I actually believed my family loved me for who I was, not for what I could fix. But love in our house was measured in utility, and I'd been useful since I was old enough to hold a calculator. My father, John, built his real estate firm like a fortress, brick by brick, deal by deal, fueled by pure control. To him, life was a negotiation. Every act of kindness had a purpose, every gesture an angle. He called it leadership. I called it fear disguised as order. My mother, Margaret, floated around him like a shadow made of apology, always smoothing, always translating his roughness into softer tones. "He means well, Deborah," she'd say after every argument. "Your father's just under pressure." Pressure became her favorite excuse, the invisible glue that held together a family permanently cracking. And then there was Aaron. 3 years younger, impossibly charming, reckless golden. The kind of person who could set a room on fire and convince everyone it was a candlelight dinner. When we were kids, I thought we were a team. I'd help him with homework, fix his bike, sneak him money when he'd spent his allowance. But somewhere along the line, helping turned into rescuing, and rescuing turned into routine. The first time I paid one of his debts, I was 24. He'd crashed a friend's car, uninsured, drunk, and terrified. I wired the money before our father found out. When he thanked me, he hugged me tight and whispered, "You saved my life." It felt good then, like I'd done something meaningful. But the second time, it didn't feel as noble. And by the fifth time, I realized I wasn't saving him anymore. I was allowing him to stay broken. I pulled out my old journal, the one where I used to write everything I couldn't say aloud. The ink had faded in places, but the words still burned. March 2019. Aaron's boutique failed. Dad says I should invest to keep family business alive. Mom cried. I transferred $15,000. He promised to pay it back. He didn't. August 2020. Aaron sued over property damage. $20,000 gone. Dad called it protecting the family name. I called it theft. January 2023. $35,000 to break Aaron's apartment lease after he quit another job. Dad said, "Be a man and handle it." I did. I always do. I closed the book, my throat tight. Every page was a record of submission proof that I'd been complicit in my own depletion. Around 3 a.m., I wandered into the hallway, flicking on the light. My eyes landed on the framed photograph hanging beside my bookshelf. It was from my graduation day. Aaron stood in the center, beaming, throwing an arm around me. My parents flanked him proudly. I was there too, slightly off to the side. My smile small, my hand awkwardly resting on Aaron's shoulder. That was always my place on the edge of the frame. Present necessary, but never centered. The memory bled into another. 16 years old. My first part-time job stacking shelves at a local supermarket. Aaron had just gotten his license. He crashed the family car 2 weeks later. Dad's voice thundered through the house. "You'll work extra shifts, Deborah. We're not losing that insurance discount because of your brother's mistake." I'd said nothing. Only nodded. Even back then, I'd learned silence was the safest language. That silence followed me through adulthood, college work, every family dinner. It became armor. If I didn't argue, there was peace. If I didn't resist, there was approval. But peace built on submission is just another kind of prison. I poured myself coffee and opened the blinds. Dawn was beginning to scrape pale orange across the horizon. The city looked half asleep, unaware that someone inside one of its apartments was realizing his whole life had been a performance scripted by obligation. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. Good morning, sweetheart. Your father didn't mean to sound harsh last night. Aaron is just desperate. Please come to the house at 8. We'll figure it out together. Together. That word always meant I'd do the work while everyone else watched. Still, I stared at the message for a long time. I could almost hear her voice, soft trembling, trying to keep the peace, even when peace was impossible. For a moment, I pitied her. Then I realized she wasn't trapped. She'd chosen her role same as I had. She enabled him just as I enabled them both. When I finally dressed and grabbed my keys, my reflection in the mirror stopped me. The tie, the pressed shirt, the neatly trimmed hair, all symbols of composure. My father would look at me and see success. My mother would see stability. Neither would see the exhaustion behind my eyes. Driving to their house felt like driving into a memory I'd outgrown. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, same manicured lawns, same silent judgment and hanging between identical houses. But something in me had shifted. I pulled up to the gate of the old house. The morning air was thick with dew. The roses my mother tended so carefully glistened in soft gold light. Even beauty here felt rehearsed, like everything existed to uphold an image. I parked, but didn't get out right away. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I watched shadows move behind the curtains. My father's silhouette rigid pacing, my mother's small fluttering around him like a bird too scared to land. And then Aaron appeared, shirt unbuttoned, hair, messy head in his hands. He looked exactly the same as always, fragile, helpless, forgiven. My pulse steadied. Whatever sympathy I'd had evaporated. I whispered to the empty car, not this time. But as I opened the door and stepped out, a familiar chill slid down my spine. Because deep down, I knew my father would find a way to make it my responsibility again. He always did. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I walked up the path. The door opened before I even knocked. My mother's voice trembled with forced warmth. "Deborah, darling, thank you for coming so early. We were just making tea." From inside, my father's voice boomed, "Let's not waste time. We have a situation." Aaron looked up from the sofa, his eyes, red face blotched with guilt, or maybe just fear. I inhaled slowly, forcing calm into my tone. "Then let's talk about it." My father gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. It was a small act of defiance, almost invisible, but it felt monumental. "Your brother owes $350,000, my father began. "He made some poor business choices. We don't have immediate liquidity. You do." I met his eyes unflinching. "That's not my debt." "Family debt is shared debt," he said sharply. "We've been over this before." Aaron sniffled, looking at me like a child begging for forgiveness he didn't deserve. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he mumbled. "I thought I could handle it. I just need time." I almost laughed. Time was the only currency he'd ever asked for, and the only one he never used wisely. My mother reached out, placing a trembling hand on mine. "Please, Deborah, you know your father's health can't take more stress. Just help one last time, for the family." One last time. I'd heard that phrase before. It was always a lie. I looked around that room, the expensive furniture, the spotless mantelpiece lined with family photos where I was always positioned slightly apart. Everything was perfect except the truth. "You want $350,000? I asked quietly. "You'll have an answer tomorrow." My father nodded, mistaking resignation for obedience. "Good. I knew you'd do the right thing." But what he didn't know was that for the first time in my life, the right thing meant saying no. The air inside my parents' house felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The smell of coffee and lemon polish clung to everything my mother's way of pretending that cleanliness could cure chaos. Aaron sat on the couch, hunched over one hand, gripping a crumpled tissue like it might save him. My father stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the street outside, as if waiting for salvation to appear in the form of a check. "Sit down," he said when I stepped into the room. "Not a request, an order." I stayed standing. "I prefer to stand," I replied evenly. He turned, eyebrows lifting in quiet irritation. "Suit yourself." My mother hovered near the coffee table, pouring tea into delicate china cups, her hands trembling just enough for the spoon to rattle. "Let's not start the morning like this," she murmured. "Please, everyone, just talk calmly." Talk calmly. In this house, that phrase had always meant, don't disagree with your father. I took in the scene. Aaron's eyes darted to me, and away his expression a mixture of shame and expectation. My mother offered me the teacup like a peace treaty. My father stood like a judge about to pronounce sentence. I forced a steady breath. "Tell me what happened, Aaron." He rubbed his eyes. "It's not as bad as it sounds." "It's $350,000, I said. That sounds pretty bad. I didn't plan for it to go wrong, he said quickly. The investors backed out then, one of them. Well, he wasn't really an investor, more like a loan shark, my father interrupted flatly. Aaron flinched. They promised quick funding. I just needed capital for inventory and the rent on the storefront and what I asked cutting him off. You didn't think to read the terms. Or maybe you thought someone else would clean it up when it blew up. Aaron's voice broke. Eli, please. Don't Eli me, I snapped before I could stop myself. The nickname, so soft, so familiar, felt like manipulation now. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. He made a mistake. We all do. I turned to her. How many times does it have to happen before it stops being a mistake? Enough, my father barked. We're not here to assign blame. We're here to fix this. By which you mean I said I'm here to fix this. He exhaled sharply, pacing once before facing me. You have the means. That's a fact. You've done well for yourself. Isn't that what family is for, to lift each other up when they fall? I met his gaze. When it's a fall, yes. Not when it's a free dive. The tension in the room tightened like a wire. My mother placed her teacup down carefully, the china clicking against the saucer. Deborah, please, don't talk to your father like that. I let out a quiet laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. I'm talking to him like an adult. Then act like one, my father shot back. I wanted to tell him that being an adult wasn't about control or domination. It was about responsibility, something Aaron had never learned, and something I'd carried too much of. Instead, I said, you've spent my entire life rewarding Aaron for being reckless and punishing me for being careful. You realize that, right? My mother's lips parted in shock. Deborah, that's not fair. Isn't it? When I graduated, you left early because Aaron had a breakup. When I bought my first house, you barely visited. But when Aaron signed a terrible lease or crashed another car, everyone rushed to save him. How is that fair? The silence that followed was the kind that makes you aware of every heartbeat. Aaron's voice came out small. I didn't ask to be treated different. No, I said softly, you just never refused it. My father slammed his palm on the table, rattling the cups. Enough. This isn't about old grievances. Your brother's life is in danger. These people don't joke around. So go to the police, I said. He shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. I will not have our name dragged through the mud. We handle our problems privately. There it was, the family creed. Image over integrity. Silence over truth. You care more about your reputation than your son's safety, I said quietly. He turned on me. Don't you dare question my priorities. I don't have to, I said. They've been the same my whole life. My mother's hand found my arm trembling. Deborah, please, he didn't mean... Stop defending him, Mom. My voice broke slightly. You've been defending him since I was a kid. It's like none of us are allowed to tell the truth. For a moment, no one spoke. My father's face darkened, the vein near his temple pulsing. Then he said low and dangerous, you will transfer the money today. No. The single word hung in the air, heavy and final. My mother gasped softly. Aaron's eyes widened. My father blinked like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. What did you say? I said no, I repeated. I've spent my entire life bailing everyone out. I've given up vacations, relationships, time, even peace of mind. And for what? So Aaron can keep failing without consequence, so you can keep pretending this family is perfect. My father took a step forward, his height towering over me, the same way it had when I was a child. You watch your tone. I said quieter now, but steady. For once I'm watching it for me. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the clock ticking on the mantel, a slow, rhythmic reminder of time passing, of years I'd never get back. Aaron finally spoke, his voice breaking. Eli, I swear I'll pay you back this time, I promise. I looked at him, and for a flicker of a second, I saw the boy who used to follow me everywhere, who used to laugh at my bad jokes, who used to believe I could fix anything. I believe you mean that, I said softly, but you don't know how to keep promises, and I can't afford to keep paying for them. My mother began to cry, quietly dabbing her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. My father looked at her, then back at me, a storm brewing behind his stare. Deborah, he said, each word measured. You will do what's right by this family, or you are no longer part of it. I met his gaze. Then maybe I was never really part of it to begin with. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, but once spoken, they felt true. The old grandfather clock chimed 8 times, the sound echoing through the house like a verdict. I turned toward the door, my mother's voice cracking behind me. Deborah, please don't go like this. I paused at the threshold and looked back. My father stood rigid, his pride unbroken. My mother small and trembling. Aaron lost somewhere between guilt and dependence. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow, I said quietly. My father nodded once, mistaking that as submission. Good. But in my mind, I'd already made the decision. Tomorrow, for the first time in my life, my answer would belong to me. I spent the rest of that day in silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy, vibrating kind that sits in your chest like static. Every thought, every emotion felt muffled as though I were underwater. At my apartment, the city lights spilled through the blinds, painting faint stripes across the living room floor. I sat on the couch with a cup of cold coffee, staring at nothing, trying to process the conversation that had just detonated in my parents' home. They wanted $350,000. They expected it. And for the first time, I'd said no. But saying no didn't feel liberating yet. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, waiting to see if you'd fall or fly. Around 7 that evening, my phone started buzzing again. Dad. I let it ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Then again. By the 5th call, I answered. Why the hell aren't you picking up? His voice roared through the speaker, full of restrained fury. Because I needed a minute, I said calmly. We don't have a minute. Do you understand what's happening? These people aren't patient. I understand perfectly, I said. Aaron owes them money. He made choices. He needs to deal with the consequences. You're being selfish, he shot back. I laughed quietly. That's funny. You've called me a lot of things, but never that one. Don't get smart with me, Deborah, he barked. This isn't about your ego. This is about family. Family takes care of family. I swallowed hard, fighting the wave of emotion those words triggered. Family takes care of each other, Dad. I've been the only one taking care of anyone for years. Silence. Then his tone dropped low and cold. You're talking like someone who's forgotten where he came from. No, I said. I'm talking like someone who finally remembered who he is. The line went quiet for a second, the kind of silence that usually came right before the storm. Then he said, You will not speak to me that way. I have given you everything, your education, your foundation, your opportunities. Education I paid for with scholarships and part-time jobs, I reminded him. Opportunities I earned on my own. He scoffed a bitter sound. And you think you'd have done that without the stability of this family? You think you built yourself in a vacuum? No, I said softly. I think I built myself despite this family. He inhaled sharply, and when he spoke again, his tone was ice. If you hang up on me tonight without giving me a commitment, you're not my son anymore. I froze. There it was, the line drawn in the same cold precision he used to sign business contracts. You'd really disown me over money, I asked. This isn't about money, he snapped. It's about loyalty. It's about what kind of man you are. Then maybe I said, voice low, I'm finally the kind who doesn't mistake loyalty for servitude. He didn't respond. The silence stretched thin and sharp. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. Tomorrow morning, he said, finally clipped and final. 9 a.m. at the house. You'll bring the funds. If you don't bother showing up ever again. The call ended before I could reply. I sat there, phone still in my hand, staring at the blank screen. For years, that voice had been my compass, even when it hurt, even when it belittled. But tonight it felt foreign, almost ridiculous. I didn't realize I was trembling until my cup tipped over, spilling cold coffee onto the carpet. The next buzz of my phone was a message not from him this time, but from Mira. Still breathing, I smiled faintly and typed back. Barely. He gave me an ultimatum. She called immediately. Deborah, she said softly, what kind of ultimatum? Give him the money or stop being his son. A long pause, then quietly, and what are you going to do? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. That's the problem. I don't know yet. Do you want my honest opinion? She asked. I always do. She hesitated. You've spent your whole life being their safety net. Maybe the only way they'll ever learn is if you step out from under them, let them fall. Her voice was calm, but her words hit deep. I can't just disappear, I said. They'll come after me. Then don't tell them, she replied. Go somewhere they can't reach, even for a while. Sometimes distance is the only way to survive. I rubbed my forehead. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, she said gently. You keep thinking you owe them something. But Deborah, you've already paid your debt 10 times over. Maybe now it's time they pay theirs. Her words lingered in the quiet that followed. We talked for another hour, not about the money, but about the way people repeat patterns until something breaks. When the call ended, I sat in the dim glow of my apartment thinking about what she'd said. Across the room, my old travel map hung on the wall, dotted with pins marking the places I'd dreamed of visiting: Thailand, Vietnam, Japan. I'd mapped it years ago, right before Aaron's first financial disaster. Back when I still believed I'd get to live for myself one day. I walked over and traced the pins with my fingertips. My whole life I'd been planning to leave, not to run, but to breathe. And every time something or someone pulled me back. Until now. The sound of rain started outside soft at first, then harder, drumming against the window. I watched it slide down the glass, each droplet carving a streak of clarity through the blur. It was strange the way storms could calm me. Maybe because they drowned out everything else, every voice, every demand, every impossible expectation. My father's words echoed again in my head. "You're not my son if you don't bring the money." For the first time, instead of fear, I felt relief. Because maybe if I wasn't his son anymore, I could finally be my own person. The clock read midnight when I finally moved. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my savings accounts, my investments, the tangible proof of every sleepless night, every promotion, every time I said no to something I wanted so I could say yes to someone else. $350,000. It was doable, but it would mean erasing everything I'd built. My hand hovered over the screen. Then I turned it off. No. For once the answer was no. The quiet that followed was heavy, but not suffocating. It was a silence that felt earned. When I finally lay in bed, the words slipped from my lips in a whisper I barely recognized as my own. "I'm done." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and slow, like applause for a decision I hadn't yet admitted to myself I'd made. The next day, the sky looked like brushed steel, cold, dull, and unforgiving. The kind of weather that feels like it's warning you about something. I hadn't slept. My thoughts looped all night. My father's ultimatum, my mother's tears, Aaron's hollow promises. Every scenario ended the same way, me losing everything except maybe the small piece of peace I'd finally claimed by saying no. By morning, I'd decided I wasn't going to the house. Not yet. Not until I'd thought clearly about what came next. I was halfway through making coffee when a heavy knock echoed through my apartment. 3 sharp, deliberate thuds. My stomach tightened. It couldn't be, but it was. When I opened the door, my father stood there, framed in the gray morning light, like a ghost of authority I'd spent my life trying to outrun. He didn't wait for an invitation. "We need to talk." Without asking, he stepped inside, scanning the apartment like a man inspecting property he already owned. His gaze landed on the map on my wall, the one covered in travel pins, and lingered there just long enough for unease to spread through my chest. "So this is where your money's been going," he said flatly. "Flights, hotels, adventures." "Plans," I corrected. "Dreams, actually." He turned to me sharply. "Dreams don't pay debts." "Neither does blind loyalty," I replied. His jaw clenched. "You're going to regret speaking to me like that." "I already regret plenty of things," I said. "But not that." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows. He set his briefcase down on the table. Of course, he brought a briefcase as if this was another business deal and took off his coat with practiced precision. "Deborah," he began, his tone shifting to something almost measured persuasive. "I understand you're upset, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. Your brother made mistakes, yes, but these people, I interrupted, are criminals, and he borrowed from them willingly." He frowned. He was desperate. "He's always desperate," I shot back. "Desperate for attention, desperate for approval, desperate for someone else to clean up after him." "That's not desperation, Dad, that's entitlement." His eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth." I took a step closer, heart pounding, but voice steady. "No, you watch yours, because I've spent 30 years listening to you call your control love and your manipulation discipline. Not today." Something flickered in his expression, a flash of disbelief, maybe even fear before it hardened again. "You've always been ungrateful," he said coldly. "You think you're better than the rest of us because you have a job title and a savings account." "I think I'm tired of being the family ATM," I said. He slammed his fist onto the table. "You have the means to fix this, Deborah." What kind of man stands by while his brother's life is threatened? The kind of man who's been used as a shield his entire life, I said, quieter now, but sharper. The kind of man who's finally realized he can't save someone who doesn't want to change. He straightened, nostrils flaring. "You've always been jealous of Aaron." The words hit me like a slap. For a second I almost laughed, but it came out like a breathless exhale. "Jealous," I said softly. "Of what exactly?" "His charm. His failures. The fact that you love him more for his mistakes than you've ever loved me for my sacrifices." "That's not true," he said immediately, though his voice lacked conviction. "It is," I said, "and deep down you know it. You've protected him from reality his entire life. You never gave him a chance to grow because you were too busy pretending he was fragile and I was invincible." He stared at me, silent, calculating. "You think money defines love," I continued. "You use it to control everyone around you, Mom, Aaron, me. But love isn't a transaction, Dad. It's not something you buy with guilt and collect with obedience." His lips curled in disdain. You've been spending too much time with that woman. She's filled your head with nonsense." "You mean Mira?" I asked. "She's the only person in my life who doesn't treat me like a resource." He waved a dismissive hand. "She's soft, idealistic. You'll see where that gets you." "I hope it gets me somewhere far from this," I said quietly. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, he said, "I've already told those people the money will be ready tomorrow. If you don't deliver, they'll come after us." My stomach turned cold. "You promised them my money before even asking me." His eyes hardened. I had to assure them we'd handle it. I couldn't show weakness. "You had no right," I said, voice shaking now, not from fear, but from disbelief. "I have every right," he thundered. "I'm your father. That doesn't make you my owner." He stared at me, stunned by the defiance. For the first time in my life, he had no immediate comeback. I took a deep breath. "You've run this family like a business. You negotiate affection, demand loyalty, and call it love. But that stops now." "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low. "Family is everything." "No," I said. "Control is everything to you. There's a difference." His face flushed deep red. "You will be at the house at 9 tomorrow with that money. That's final." I looked him in the eye and said, "You'll get an answer at 9, but not the one you want." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, fury radiating off him in waves. At the threshold he turned and said almost softly, "If you walk away from this family, Deborah, don't expect to be welcomed back." I met his gaze without blinking. "If I walk away, I won't be looking back." The door slammed behind him so hard that the picture frames on my wall rattled. I stood there in the echo of it all, heart pounding in my chest, the quiet apartment suddenly feeling too big and too small at the same time. My eyes drifted to the world map again, the one covered in pins, each one a dream deferred. I touched the small red one over Thailand, the first stop I'd always imagined. And for the first time, I realized something with absolute clarity. I didn't need permission anymore. The next morning at 9 o'clock, he'd be waiting for my answer. And my answer would be silence. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I sat at my dining table, a single lamp glowing beside me, surrounded by open journals, travel notes, and old bank statements, the debris of my life neatly laid out like evidence at a crime scene. Except this wasn't a crime. It was a reckoning. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city soaked and shining. Inside, the quiet was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. For years, I'd built my existence on the illusion of stability, working, saving, planning, preparing. Always preparing. For emergencies, for the future, for them. But never for myself. Until now, my father's last words replayed over and over. "If you walk away from this family, don't expect to be welcomed back." Once that would have gutted me. The thought of losing the title of son, even in name, would have felt like death. But now the words didn't hurt. They rang hollow like a key turning in a lock that no longer fit. I opened my laptop and stared at my financial dashboard. The numbers blinked back at me, years of effort, discipline, and sacrifice condensed into tidy lines of digital text. $402, $761.28. That was my total. The sum of every night I worked overtime, every weekend I skipped plans, every dream I'd deferred for the sake of family duty. I hovered my cursor over the transfer funds option and felt the weight of choice settle over me. I could give them what they wanted, empty everything I'd built, and the pattern would continue forever. Aaron would stumble again, my father would command, my mother would plead, and I would cave. Or I could stop it, right here. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the price of my own freedom. The thought hit me like an electric pulse, sharp and terrifying. Because freedom isn't given, it's taken. And taking it always costs something. At 2:17 a.m., I opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "I am no longer the family's insurance policy. I am a person, not a solution." Then I began to plan, not out of anger, but with the calm precision of someone drafting the blueprint of his escape. Step 1. Withdraw what I needed enough to sustain me for a year abroad, but not enough to be traced easily. Step 2. Leave a letter, not for pity or drama, but for closure. Step 3. Vanish before 9 a.m. If I stayed until morning, he'd show up again. He'd bark, intimidate, manipulate, and maybe out of habit or guilt, I'd fold. I knew his voice too well, the way it could burrow into my willpower and twist it until I believed his lies again. So I couldn't let him have that chance. I made coffee, black, strong, bitter, and started organizing. One suitcase, one backpack. Nothing sentimental except the old watch my mother had given me when I left for college. It didn't even work anymore, but it reminded me that time once lost can't be bought back. I opened my travel journal, the one that had been collecting dust for 5 years, and flipped through its pages. Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, names that had once sounded like fiction. I traced the first route with my finger and whispered it aloud like a prayer. Bangkok. There was a strange lightness in my chest as I packed. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to fix something broken. I was preparing to leave something broken behind. By 4 a.m., the apartment was spotless, every surface wiped, every item chosen with purpose. It looked less like a home now and more like a chapter about to close. I took out a small wooden box, a gift my mother had given me years ago, engraved with the words, "Family Forever." The irony stung. I opened it and filled it carefully. Copies of every transfer I'd made to Aaron over the years. Screenshots of text messages where he'd promised to repay me. Receipts for the money that had disappeared into his disasters. And on top of it all, a letter addressed simply to my family. It wasn't cruel or bitter. I'd rewritten it 3 times before settling on a tone that was honest, almost gentle. You've taught me many things. How to work hard, how to endure, how to survive. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live. I can't give you what you're asking for this time, not because I don't love you, but because love without boundaries isn't love, it's control. I hope one day you'll understand that saying no isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. I'm leaving for a while, not to punish you, but to find out who I am when I'm not the family's fixer. When I'm ready, maybe I'll reach out. Maybe. Until then, take care of each other, the way you always expected me to take care of you. I folded the letter, placed it in the box, and set my house key on top. By 6 a.m., the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, brushing the apartment in soft gold. The city outside was waking up oblivious to the quiet rebellion happening inside my walls. I sat for a while watching the light grow, letting the finality of my decision sink in. There was fear, of course. Leaving everything behind isn't bravery. It's a kind of madness mixed with hope. But beneath the fear was something new, something steady, peace. At 7:03, my phone buzzed a text from my mother. "Please, sweetheart, just come to breakfast. We can talk it out." A follow-up message seconds later. "Your father isn't himself. Don't make him do something he'll regret." My chest tightened, but I didn't reply. I couldn't. Every word from them was a hook, and I was done being caught. I turned the phone off, removed the SIM card, and slid it into the drawer beside my desk. I showered, dressed simply, jeans, gray shirt, black jacket, and stood by the mirror one last time. The face looking back at me was the same, but the eyes were different, clearer, lighter. At 8:30, I called Mira. She answered on the first ring voice, groggy with sleep. "Deborah, I'm leaving," I said quietly. She sat up immediately. "Leaving where?" "I don't know. Away. I can't face him again. Not today." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Then go. Don't wait for permission. You don't owe them your life." "I know." "Do you want me to come with you?" The offer caught me off guard, gentle, sincere. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining her hand in mine, the safety of not being alone. But this wasn't a journey I could share. Not yet. "I think I need to do this by myself," I said. She didn't argue, then promised me one thing. "What?" "That you won't disappear out of anger. Do it because you're ready to live." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." When we hung up, I grabbed my bags, took one last look around the apartment, and exhaled. Then I whispered the same word I'd used with my father the night before, the one he thought was surrender, but was really freedom. "Okay." At 9 a.m., when he'd be waiting for me with the same cold stare and impossible demands, I'd already be gone. And for the first time in my life, that thought didn't fill me with guilt. It filled me with peace. At dawn, the city was still half asleep, washed in that quiet, gray-blue light that makes everything look softer than it really is. My decision felt like something sacred in that stillness, fragile but irreversible. By the time most people were reaching for their first cup of coffee, I was already in motion. Every move felt deliberate. I showered, folded my clothes into neat stacks, zipped my suitcase shut, and set my passport on top of it. My hands trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of doing something entirely for myself. For years, my life had been defined by other people's emergencies. This time, I was creating my own escape plan. At 7:15, I brewed a final cup of coffee in my kitchen. The bitter scent filled the air, sharp, grounding. I carried it to the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the wooden box that held everything I was leaving behind: the letter, the proof, the key. That box looked too small to contain the weight of my entire past. I ran my thumb over its smooth surface and whispered, "You'll understand someday." I wasn't sure if I meant my family or myself. I placed the box in the exact center of the coffee table, adjusted it once, then twice, until it looked perfect. That small ritual control over a single detail calmed me more than anything else could. When I opened the curtains, the rain had stopped. The world outside gleamed with the kind of freshness that only follows a storm. I took it as a sign. Before I left, I turned on my phone one last time. There were 17 unread messages. 7 from my mother, their tones swinging between guilt and pleading. 8 from my father, all curt commands. 2 from Aaron, one that said, "Please, Eli, just talk to him," and another that simply said, "I'm sorry." I read none of them. Instead, I opened a new message and typed exactly 3 words to Mira. "I'm doing it." Her reply came less than a minute later. "Then go. No second thoughts. You deserve your own life." That was the last text I received. Before I powered down the phone, slipped it into the drawer beside the bed, and left it there, a small glowing artifact of the life I was walking away from. By 7:45, I was outside, suitcase rolling quietly behind me. The morning air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt and blooming jacarandas. I flagged a taxi at the corner. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and a faded cap, loaded my luggage into the trunk and asked airport. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "International terminal." He nodded, started the engine, and we pulled away. As the city slipped past the window, I watched familiar landmarks fade: the bakery, where my mother used to buy Sunday pastries, the park where Aaron and I played soccer as kids, the tall office building where I'd spent the last decade turning hours into money. Each place looked smaller now, like I was seeing them from the perspective of someone already gone. Halfway to the airport, my phone buzzed. I'd forgotten that its vibration still worked even while powered off. My father must have been calling. I stared at it for a long second before muting the sound completely. He'd be at my door soon. He'd find the box and the key, and for once, nothing he could say would change the outcome. The idea should have filled me with guilt. Instead, it filled me with a strange, quiet relief. At a red light, the driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Long trip." "Yeah," I said, "maybe the longest of my life." He smiled faintly. "Then don't look back, my friend. Looking back ruins good beginnings." I didn't reply, but the words sank deep. At the airport, the check-in process moved like a dream. The line, the conveyor belt, the distant hum of announcements, all of it blurred together. When the airline clerk asked for my destination, I said the word I'd been whispering for 5 years: Bangkok. The syllables rolled off my tongue like freedom itself. As I waited at the gate, I opened my travel journal. On the first page, I wrote the date, then a single sentence: "Leaving isn't running away when you're walking toward peace." I drew a small circle beside the word peace, a symbol, a promise. When the boarding call came, I felt my pulse quicken. I thought I might cry, but no tears came. Only a steady calm, the kind that arrives when you finally make peace with yourself. I walked down the jet bridge, the faint hum of the engines growing louder. Each step felt lighter, as though I was shedding invisible weight. At my seat, I buckled the belt, closed my eyes, and listened to the muffled chatter of passengers finding their places. The plane began to move. Through the small oval window, I caught a glimpse of the city skyline still wrapped in morning haze. Somewhere down there, my father was probably standing in my empty apartment shouting my name into the silence. My mother was likely crying. Aaron may be confused, maybe angry. And yet I felt no panic, no regret. The engines roared, the ground tilted, the city fell away beneath me. For the first time in my adult life, I was untethered. I pulled out my tablet connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and opened a blank message to Mira. "I'm in the air. Tell them I'm safe if they ask. Tell them not to look for me." A few seconds later, her reply appeared. "I won't tell them where you are, but I'll tell them you're finally living." I smiled, leaned my head against the cold window, and whispered, "Finally." As the clouds swallowed the world below, I let my eyes close. The steady hum of the engines became a lullaby, the rhythmic vibration beneath my seat, a heartbeat guiding me into the unknown. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed not of the past, but of an endless road bordered by fields of gold sunlight spilling across it like forgiveness. Back home, my father's fury would find only a locked door and a small wooden box, a truth he couldn't control, a son he couldn't command. But I'd be somewhere far above that life weightless and free, heading toward the first sunrise that truly belonged to me. While my plane cut across the sky back home, my absence detonated like a silent bomb. I only learned what happened later, pieces of it filtering through Mira then. From a neighbor who'd seen it all. but I could picture it vividly. I'd lived inside those walls too long not to. At precisely 9 o'clock, my father pulled up to my apartment building. He was always punctual, as if time itself answered to him. The silver sedan idled at the curb while he straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, rehearsing the dominance he intended to deliver. He probably expected to find me standing by the door, money-ready contrition in my eyes. Instead, he found silence. The neighbor said he rang the bell 4 times before realizing the door was unlocked. When he stepped inside, the first thing he saw was the box resting neatly on the coffee table like a verdict waiting to be read. He must have recognized the handwriting on the envelope, my steady, deliberate script. To my family. The neighbor said he stood there for a long moment before opening it, his jaw tightening as he flipped through the papers, the receipts, the copies of transfers, the IOUs in Aaron's handwriting. Then the letter. He read it twice, the first time fast like a man searching for a loophole, the second time slower, quieter. Then she said he slammed his fist against the wall so hard that a frame photo crashed to the floor. Across town, my mother was setting the breakfast table when her phone rang. She answered, expecting to hear my voice. Instead, she heard his. "She's gone," he said. "Gone where?" There was a pause, then his voice, hollow, distant, replied, "I don't know." I imagined the sound of the ceramic mug slipping from her hand, shattering on the kitchen tile. My mother had spent her life smoothing over cracks. This one she couldn't fix. She called Mira first, of course, the only person she knew who might have answers. "Please," she begged, "if you know where Deborah is, tell me. I just need to know he's safe." Mira, steady as ever, told her the truth, or at least the version of it that wouldn't cause panic. "He's safe," she said, "but he needs space. He'll reach out when he's ready." My mother cried. My father didn't. He raged. He accused Mira of hiding me, of conspiring, of poisoning me against the family. He even threatened to call the police. But there's no crime in disappearing when you're an adult. There's only disobedience, and for him, that was the greater offense. For a few days, chaos reigned. My father tore through my apartment, searching for clues, convinced I'd left breadcrumbs he could follow. My mother kept calling my number, not realizing it had already been disconnected. Aaron tried once too, a brief and awkward voicemail that began with, "I don't know what to say," and ended with, "Please come back." But I didn't hear it until months later. By then the words had lost their urgency. When the dust settled, reality forced its hand. The debt collectors Aaron had borrowed from weren't the kind to wait. With no miracle bailout, this time my father had to act fast and publicly. He liquidated 2 of his investment properties, the ones he'd always boasted about keeping for leverage. But the market wasn't kind, and his pride cost him an extra $100,000 in rushed sales. The rest came from their retirement savings, the nest egg he and my mother had guarded for decades. For the first time in his life, John Davenport had to clean up a mess without delegating it. Mira told me later it nearly broke him. I believed her. But breaking isn't always a tragedy. Sometimes it's the first step toward being real. Meanwhile, I was thousands of miles away walking through the humid chaos of Bangkok. The streets pulsed with life tuk-tuks, buzzing like bees, the scent of grilled satay mixing with exhaust fumes, the chatter of street vendors calling out prices. Everything felt raw, unfiltered, honest. I rented a small room above a cafe run by an elderly Thai couple who didn't ask questions. They taught me how to say, "Khop kun krub, thank you," and smiled every time I said it correctly. Every morning I walked through the city until my legs ached. Every night I wrote in my journal. Sometimes I wrote about my family, sometimes I didn't. I tried not to hate them. I tried even harder not to hate myself for staying so long. Mira emailed me once a week. She never pried. Her messages were like postcards from another universe. "Your mom's been volunteering at the library. I think it gives her peace." Aaron took a retail job. Entry level. He hates it, but he's showing up every day. "Your dad sold the big office. He's been quieter lately. Smaller. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Each update was a piece of proof that the world was still turning even without me holding it up. Still, guilt visited me in waves. It would sneak up on quiet nights while I sipped tea on the balcony or watched the rain blur the neon lights. Guilt for leaving my mother's tears behind. Guilt for the wreckage that my absence forced them to confront. But underneath the guilt, something else was growing, something steadier. Peace. One evening, I found myself sitting on a rooftop bar overlooking the Chao Phraya River. The city stretched endlessly, glittering in the humid dusk. I raised my glass and whispered, "To freedom." For the first time, the word didn't taste like rebellion. It tasted like truth. Weeks passed, then months. I moved through countries the way most people move through seasons, slow, deliberate, each one teaching me something new. Cambodia showed me humility. Vietnam taught me stillness. Japan reminded me of structure without suffocation. And all the while, my family was learning their own lessons. My father learned loss, not of money, but of control. My mother learned strength, the kind that doesn't come from obedience, but endurance. Aaron learned consequences, the hard, necessary kind. The universe, it seemed, had finally demanded balance. I didn't vanish out of spite. I left because staying would have meant erasing myself completely. And sometimes leaving is the only way to teach people how to live without you. On my 16th week abroad, I received another email from Mira. Your father came by my apartment again. He looked different, older. He didn't shout this time. He just asked if I thought you'd ever come home. I told him I didn't know. He nodded and said, maybe that's fair. I read that line again and again until my vision blurred. Maybe that's fair. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something, an acknowledgement that maybe for once I wasn't wrong to choose myself. That night, I walked along the river until the city went quiet around me. I looked up at the scattered lights reflected in the water and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd finally gained. Freedom, distance, perspective. It turned out they were all the same thing. Bangkok became my first act of rebirth. Every sense felt raw and heightened, the rush of motorbikes in the narrow streets, the scent of rain-soaked jasmine, the hum of night markets glowing under strings of lights. For the first few weeks, I was intoxicated by it all, the chaos, the anonymity, the quiet truth that no one here knew who I was or who I had been. For once, I wasn't the responsible son, the emergency contact, the fixer. I was just Deborah. The first nights were the hardest. Sleep came late and shallow. My body was free, but my mind still tethered to a kitchen table, thousands of miles away, to the sound of my father's voice echoing through that house, to my mother's soft sobs behind a closed door, to Aaron's silence. Freedom, I learned, isn't clean. It's beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Every morning I force myself to write, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes pages. I'm learning to exist without apologizing. My hands don't shake when I wake up anymore. I keep waiting for the guilt to call, but the number's been disconnected. Eventually, writing became ritual, my new form of prayer. I rented a modest room above a flower shop. The window faced a street that never truly slept. Down below, vendors sold mango, sticky rice to drunk tourists and workers heading home from night shifts. There was something comforting about that rhythm, a city that pulsed, imperfect but alive. I began teaching English part-time at a small local school, more for the routine than the money. The children called me Teacher E and laughed when I mispronounced Thai words. For the first time in years, laughter didn't feel like something I had to earn. Mira's emails came weekly, short, consistent grounding. She never overloaded me with news, just the essentials. Your mom started volunteering at the library full-time. Aaron's still working at the department store, seems to be keeping out of trouble. Your dad's quieter. He doesn't talk about business much anymore. Her restraint was kindness. She knew I needed distance to heal, not a daily reminder of what I'd left. One evening, as I walked along the Chao Phraya River, I realized I hadn't checked my bank balance in weeks. For someone like me, that was revolutionary. Money had always been my measure of control, the thing that kept chaos at bay. Now I was learning to live with uncertainty, to let each day unfold without a spreadsheet dictating my worth. Still, there were moments of ache, flashes of loneliness that came without warning. A song at a cafe that reminded me of my mother humming while cooking. A young man at a market who looked so much like Aaron, it made me stop mid-step. A father scolding his son, his tone sharp and commanding, and the way the boy's shoulders tensed in quiet fear. Those moments were reminders that the past doesn't disappear just because you leave it behind. It follows you quietly until you learn to walk beside it. 3 months into my journey, I moved on Vietnam, then Cambodia. The transition felt seamless, like turning a page in a long novel I didn't want to rush. Vietnam gave me stillness. The narrow streets of Hanoi taught me patience, how to move with the current instead of against it. I'd sit by Hoan Kiem Lake at sunrise, watching elderly couples practice Tai Chi, the water rippling softly like a mirror of calm I was trying to build within myself. Cambodia gave me perspective. I visited Angkor Wat at dawn, the temple emerging from the mist like a memory resurfacing. Standing there, I thought of my father, the way he'd built his life, brick by brick, terrified of ruin. He'd mistaken structure for strength. But sometimes I realize things have to fall apart to become sacred. By the time I reached Japan, 6 months had passed. The seasons had changed both around me and inside me. Tokyo was clean, precise, disciplined, a mirror of everything I used to be. But now I move slower. I took trains without destinations. I wrote poems in the margins of my notebook. I even started a small travel blog under a pseudonym, The Responsible One. It began as a private outlet, short essays about learning to let go, about what it meant to stop being defined by obligation. But to my surprise, strangers started reading. They left comments like, "I thought I was the only one. Your words feel like a mirror I didn't know I needed." And for the first time, my pain served a purpose that didn't cost me something. Mira and I kept in touch. She told me she missed me, but she never asked me to come home. That was love, not possession, but patience. In one email she wrote, "Your father asked about you again. He didn't shout this time, just asked if you were safe. I think he's beginning to understand." That line stayed with me for weeks. Understanding, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a quiet recognition that maybe I wasn't the villain he'd painted me to be. It was late April when I finally allowed myself to look back at photos from home. I had avoided them for so long, afraid that nostalgia might undo me. But as I scrolled through the old pictures, I didn't feel regret anymore, only distance. The faces looked familiar but far away, like characters from a story I'd once been trapped inside. In Kyoto, during cherry blossom season, I sat under a canopy of pale pink petals, watching them drift to the ground like slow rain. I opened my journal and wrote, "Maybe healing isn't moving on. Maybe it's learning to live beautifully with what broke you." That night I dreamed of home, not the suffocating house I grew up in, but a version of it where my father listened, my mother laughed, and Aaron took responsibility for his own life. It was just a dream, but it no longer hurt to imagine it. Months later, Mira's next email arrived while I was on a train to Osaka. "Your family's different now," she wrote. "Aaron got promoted. Your mom seems lighter. Your dad sold another property and started gardening. Can you imagine him planting flowers? Maybe this was the only way things could have changed." I read that message 3 times before replying. Tell them I'm proud of them, even if they never hear it. When I pressed send, something inside me shifted, the last thread of resentment finally loosening. That night, I walked through Osaka's lantern-lit alleys, the hum of life all around me, and realized something simple but profound. I had left to escape, but I stayed away to grow. And in doing so, I'd given all of us the chance to become something new. Spring sunlight spilled across the Paris Cafe terrace, painting everything in gold. The clinking of cups, the scent of roasted coffee, the hum of a language I barely understood. All of it felt like proof that life could start again quietly without fanfare. It had been a year since the morning I left. 15 countries, 12 notebooks, countless moments of silence that taught me more than any conversation ever had. I'd just ordered a croissant when my laptop pinged a new message. The sender's name froze me mid-sip. From Mira. Subject, your mother. For a few seconds, my heartbeat drowned out the cafe noise. Mira's message was short, cautious, like someone passing me something fragile. "Your mother came to see me. She asked for your email. I didn't give it, but she left a letter, said it was important. I'm forwarding it here. Read it only if you're ready." Attached, letter from mom.pdf. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking beside her name. My mother. The last time I'd heard her voice, it was pleading. The last image I had of her was through the rearview mirror of my memory, standing small and trembling while my father shouted. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I opened it anyway. "My dear Deborah," it began. "I've written and rewritten this letter 100 times. I don't know if you'll ever see it, and maybe that's what gives me the courage to finally send it. If you're reading this, it means Mira believed you were strong enough to face us again, even just in words. You were right to leave." I read the sentence again, certain my eyes were deceiving me. But it was there, plain, unadorned, unlike anything she'd ever said before. "You were right to leave," she wrote again. "I see that now. You did what all of us should have done long ago, refused to pretend our family was healthy when it wasn't." Her words didn't sound like my mother. The careful peacekeeper, the woman who'd rather drown quietly than let anyone see her gasping. But maybe distance had reshaped her too. "Your father has changed. He doesn't know how to say it, but he's been humbled. Losing control frightened him. Losing you changed him. He's not the same man who banged on your door that morning. He's quieter now. He spends hours in the garden, the one he used to call a waste of time. He grows marigolds. I think they remind him of you, though he'd never admit it. I could almost see it, my father, The man who once measured worth in square footage and profit margins, now kneeling in the dirt, coaxing something delicate to life. Aaron's working steadily. He got promoted to assistant manager. He still stumbles, but he's trying. He's paying his debts. I think he finally understands how much you carried for him. The words blurred for a moment as my throat tightened. I've started working too. At the library. I like it there. The quiet, the smell of old pages, the people who ask for stories. Maybe that's what I needed all along, stories. I can finally see ours for what it was, not a tragedy, but a pattern that had to break. And you were the one brave enough to break it. I hope you've forgiven us, or at least started to. I don't expect you to come back. I only want you to know this. You're loved, and more importantly, you're respected. Be safe, my son. Wherever you are, be free. I sat there long after finishing the letter, the words burning behind my eyelids. For a moment, Paris blurred around me, the waiters, the laughter, the sunlight glinting off teacups. It was like the world had paused to let me breathe. I had imagined this letter 1,000 ways, apologies that rang hollow excuses wrapped in affection. Pleas for return. But not this, not honesty, not grace. I didn't cry. The tears had already done their time months ago. Instead, I felt a quiet warmth spread through me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Maybe that was enough. Later that afternoon, I wrote back. The words came slowly, deliberately. Mom, I received your letter. Thank you for writing it and for seeing the truth, even if it took a year. I'm safe. I'm happy. I've learned more about life and about myself than I ever could have by staying. I'm not ready to come home yet, but I'm glad to know you're all finding your way. Maybe someday we'll meet again, not as parent and child, but as people who finally understand each other. I hit send, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. 3 days later, Mira arrived in Paris just like we'd planned months ago. When I saw her step off the train, her smile, soft and knowing, the weight of the last year finally slipped off my shoulders. We spent the afternoon walking along the Seine, the air heavy with the smell of blooming wisteria and the sound of distant accordion music. At one point, Mira stopped by a bookstall, flipping through a stack of old travel journals. You should publish yours someday, she said. People need stories like yours. Stories like mine, I asked, smiling. Ones that start with loss and end with freedom, she said. We sat on a bench overlooking the water, sunlight flickering on her hair. After a long silence, she asked quietly, Do you ever think about going back? I thought about it, really thought about it. About my father's marigolds, my mother's library job, Aaron's new life, about the family I'd once run from and the people they were now becoming. Sometimes I admitted, but not out of guilt anymore, out of curiosity. She nodded. If you did, would it be for them or for you? For me, I said without hesitation. And that's how I'll know the time is right. Months later, I received another message from my mother. This time, not a letter, an invitation. Subject Aaron's wedding. Message. He's marrying someone wonderful, kind, steady. We'd love for you to come, even just for a day. No pressure, no expectations. Just family, however you define it. I sat with that email for a long time. A year ago, I would have deleted it, instantly terrified of being pulled back into the orbit of duty and guilt. But now I didn't feel fear, I felt choice. The woman who had left in the night, the one trembling on an airplane seat, convincing herself that freedom wasn't selfish, might have said no. The man I'd become wasn't sure. Maybe some bridges aren't meant to be burned, only crossed when the time feels right. Maybe this was the time, or maybe not yet. I closed my laptop, looking out at the Paris sunset bleeding gold into the river. And then, like the storyteller I had become, I asked the question out loud, not to anyone in particular, but to the invisible audience who'd been with me all along. What would you do? Would you go back just to see if love can be rebuilt on new foundations? Or would you stay away to protect the peace you fought so hard to find? I smiled, imagining the quiet hum of replies from strangers, each one carrying their own version of courage. If my story meant something to you, I whispered, share it. Comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what family means to you now. Because sometimes the most courageous act of love, both for yourself and for others, is knowing when to walk away. The camera of life would fade out there, Paris glowing behind me, a man unburdened, the horizon wide open. Until next time, I'd say softly, take care of yourself first, because you deserve that kind of love.